From the darkest reaches of space to the deepest corners of your mind. Welcome to From the Void.
Welcome to From the Void, the podcast where history, mystery, and the unexplained converge. I'm your host, John Williamson. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most enduring legends of the ancient world, the lost civilization of Atlantis. First described by Plato over 2,000 years ago, Atlantis has inspired centuries of speculation, exploration, and wild theory. Was it a real place swallowed by the sea, or a powerful allegory crafted by one of history's greatest philosophers? To help us separate fact from fiction, I'm joined by Dr. Steve Kershaw, historian, classicist, and author of A Brief History of Atlantis. Together, we'll explore the origins of the myth, its influence on modern culture, and the tantalizing clues that have kept the mystery alive for generations. So put on your diving gear, metaphorically speaking, and join us as we descend into the depths. All right, very excited to have Steve Kershaw on with me today to talk about a very interesting topic. Thank you so much for spending some of your day with me.
I'm delighted, John. It's nice to be with you.
Absolutely. So before we get started, tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and the work that you do.
Okay, so I'm a classicist. So I live in the world of the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans. So it's I kind of live in a world of dead languages and the people who don't speak them anymore. That's my kind of thing. And I have a sort of portfolio of different things I do. I operate principally out of Oxford University Department for Continuing Education, but I also do various lectures for the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, and I do what else do I do? I do lectures for an organisation called the Arts Society in the UK. And I also do sort of lecturing for cultural travel companies. So every now and again, I get to do beautiful trips around Greece and Sicily and things, and talk about old things and do it in style, which is a nice gig. And I write. And one of those things that I've written is the book that I think we'd like to talk about today.
Absolutely. What a fascinating, at least side gig that you have. You travel, like, what's the guy's name here that we always watch on the public broadcasting network? Steve, I can't remember his name now, but I've been following him since I was a child, and I always thought that was the coolest job ever, getting to travel and write about all these cool places.
Yeah, it's fun. I must say, I regard it as my payback for when I was a student having to learn all those Latin irregular verbs and strange Greek constructions. It's my payback for for that.
That's fantastic. Well, before we dig into the topic of Atlantis, which is a fascinating, mystery in and of itself, we first have to talk about Plato. And for those listening who are not necessarily big philosophy fans like I am, and understand who Plato and folks like that are, tell people a little bit about who was Plato and what were some of his major contributions.
Yeah, Plato was an Athenian philosopher who worked. The material that we're going to look at was written in the 4th century BCE, and Plato was one of the world's great thinkers, and there are many things that interest him. One of which particularly is the ideal state. Is it possible to create an ideal state? And if so, what should it look like? And he spends a lot of time trying to work this out. He's also interested in moral philosophy as well, and what is good, what is beauty, and how should we be living our lives. But one of the things that interests him particularly is the idea of the ideal state, and if we can construct an ideal state, how should we do that? What is the most effective state that we can live in? When you go through his ideas, a lot of the time, to be quite honest, I would not like to live in Plato's ideal state. It doesn't sound, but as far as he's concerned, it's all for the common good, and everybody is better off. So those are the ideas that he's exploring, and he does that particularly in a work which is known as Plato's Republic, where he goes to great lengths to try to establish how this should be. But he's always refining his ideas as well. So when he sort of creates the idea of Atlantis, then he's kind of working on if you like, a development of the ideal state. So yeah, fundamentally a great thinker living in Athens, 4th century BC, with a lot of big ideas.
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating. And for those who do follow philosophy, at least loosely, some of his students were almost equally as famous, like Socrates and some of the others who also had their own opinions on what he meant by Atlantis and that sort of thing. So
yeah, very much so. And one of the key ones there is Aristotle, who was a student of Plato's and most likely was studying with him at the same time as he was writing the dialogues where he sends Atlantis out into the world. And yeah, we should perhaps say that the Plato's style of writing is quite interesting. Is that he doesn't do is write sort of great discursive tracts of ideas, but his ideas are presented to us in the form of dialogues, so sort of conversations between different people where they can sort of broach ideas and then question them and knock the ideas around. So it's quite an interesting way that he has of presenting his material to the world, and he does it in those he himself does not appear as a character. It's usually through Socrates, who's kind of his teacher, and so Socrates has conversations with various people, and they throw these ideas around and see where they can take them.
Yeah, so tell people a little bit about Atlantis and describe what Atlantis was purported to be, and just kind of lay the groundwork for folks out there.
Yeah, well, so what happens is that it's the Atlantis story appears in two of Plato's sort of later dialogues, in one called the Timaeus and one called the Critias. And at the beginning of the Timaeus, Socrates is having a conversation with a bunch of his pals, and what they say is that they say. It's an imaginary conversation, and they sort of pick up and say, we had a really nice conversation yesterday where we invented the ideal state. And we've got all these great ideas about how it should be and what it should be like. And they kind of rehearse it. They sort of tell us what an ideal state is like. And then Socrates says, that's cool. We really like this idea. We like it, but I want to see it I want to stress test this idea. At the moment we've got this idea, and he likens it to looking at animals who are asleep. And he says, we like doing that, but we'd really like to see them move. I want to see them moving and hunting. I don't want the still image. I want the movie, if you like. And so this is what I want to explore. And I want to know whether our ideal state will operate in a time of stress. How could it be in wartime? How would that be? And out of this conversation, there's a character called Critias who says, well, actually, all of this talk we're having reminds me of a story that I heard. And I kind of got it from my granddad when he was really old, and he got it from his granddad, and he got it from this guy called Solon, who was a famous Athenian lawgiver around 600 BCE or so. And he got it from a bunch of Egyptians who he'd been talking to. And they told him this story of an incredible island that was called Atlantis. Atlantis means of Atlas. And this is not the Atlas who holds the world up. It's a different one. But it's Atlas's island. And they come up with this idea, and they say, wow, that's cool. What's it like? And it's this massive island. It's a kind of continent-sized island that's located, he says, in the Atlantic Ocean. And it's as big as kind of Europe and Africa put together. And on it, there are a bunch of amazing settlements. It's sort of established by the god Poseidon, and there are sort of cities on this island, and we go into a description of it, and it's utterly astonishing. It's incredibly fertile. It's all the possible natural resources, animal, vegetable, mineral that you could possibly wish for. It's enormous. They've got powerful armies, and they kind of learn how to sail and so on. And what else have they got? They are extraordinary city builders and engineers. They build build canals like there's there's nobody's built canals like the Atlanteans. So they have this incredible fertile world, everything that they could want, really. They have an extraordinary capital city, a number of cities. Plato gives a very it's an interesting and detailed description of this capital city that's so detailed that you can draw it. You can take the dimensions and draw it. It's sort of situated inland from the coast by a great canal, and there's concentric rings of water and land with places for warships and hippodromes for chariot racing, and a wondrous palace in the middle, protected by walls of different kinds of metals. And there's this wondrous palace in the middle with precious metals and wondrous temples and bulls everywhere. And it's just the most amazing place. And what's interesting about it is that these people they've got everything that they could, as I say, everything they could possibly want, but it's not enough. They want more. They always want more. And so what they do is the Egyptians tell Solon, who tells all these other people, is they invade from outside their base in the Atlantic, and they invade and they get as far as Egypt, and they get as far as confronting the Athenians. Now, the Athenians in this sort of Atlantean world are an embodiment of the ideal state. This is where the idea has come up. So, how does the ideal state operate under stress? Athenians, and the date is imagined as being like, pre-9000 BC. And these Athenians are the perfect ideal state. They're not like the Atlanteans. They've got everything they need, but they don't want any more. They're happy, they're content, everything is organized in a nice, ordered state. And when the Atlanteans come, the Athenians defeat them in battle. This is the whole point about, the ideal state. It wins. The ideal state has to win against these sort of aggressive imperialist outsiders. And as punishment for the Atlantean aggression, if you like, the god Zeus sinks the island in a huge, literally cataclysmic disaster. I say literally because kataklysmos in Greek is the word for a cataclysm, for a flood. So he sinks Atlantis beneath the waves, and that's that for them. And it's quite interesting in Plato's text. There's two texts, and it's an unfinished work, which is interesting too. So it finishes with it's really great. We've had this fantastic description of the island, and then Plato, and then Zeus. To explain what he's doing, he gathers everybody together in his heavenly palace and says, and that's it. So it just stops in mid sentence.
The ultimate cliffhanger.
Yeah, totally. It's great.
Oh my goodness. So what's interesting to me is obviously this appears to be sort of this exploration of empire and society and all these things. And yet throughout the centuries, there are people who have been split on both sides of whether or not it's an allegory versus a historically factual place that existed, to the extent where I caught randomly a TV show the other day where James Cameron himself, the director of Titanic, is funding explorations to go find what they think may have been the location.
Yeah.
How did we get to that point? Because it seems as if even Plato's students, I think I said Socrates earlier, I meant Aristotle, felt it was allegorical, and yet his student, forgive me if I mispronounce, Crantor, maybe?
Yeah.
Felt as if it may have been historical. And so how did we get to that point where there's this division in terms of how to interpret this text?
Yeah, it's fascinating, I think. The trajectory of the story after it's been told is fantastic, I think. And yeah, I think Aristotle is interesting that, he has this famous thing of that the man who created it also destroyed it. So he sort of, but I think with a lot of it is that a lot of the people, Plato has this incredible status in ancient philosophy, as he is the great philosopher. So there's a feeling amongst people who come later and study his work that pretty much everything he says must be true. So there's this great temptation to if you like to assume that the island of Atlantis is something that is a genuine thing, and that then maybe we can go and find it and get it. And there's various people in And they argue like crazy in late antiquity, the sort of later Roman times. There's a bunch of philosophers who are all banging these ideas about, can we dig into the text and pull out, special meanings, and it's all about numbers. And then there's others who are saying, no, actually, we're actually dealing with a real place. So I think part of it is that Plato has this extraordinary status of just that he's the philosophical man. So we're going to take what he says as if you like literal truth. And it's interesting, I think, because in the dialogues, in the Critias dialogues, the guy who tells the story is called Critias, and he's great. He keeps saying, guys, it's a true story, this, it's true, I've heard this, it really is a true story. It's such a true story. And he keeps saying it again and again and again. And again, that people see value in that as indicating that we might be dealing with the true story. And I think the other thing about it is it's so seductive, is that the description of particularly the city, I think, is wondrous. It's such a magical place. It has a, he's conjured up a thing with incredible romance. He's a great creator of images, I think, is Plato. That you can visualize it. As I say, you can draw it. You can visualize it. So if you like, yeah, why not go and look for it? And people have been looking for it ever since Plato told the tale.
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating. One of the things I think might be interesting to talk about a little bit is how it sort of relates to modern times. I'm obviously based in the United States. One could argue taking its, historical from the historical playbook of empires past, Rome and so on. What are the things that you feel like Plato was trying to express that we could learn from in the future when examining a society or, a nation state?
Yeah, I think this is interesting because I think this is where he's coming from really with the ideas, is that it goes back to his own times. I think he's a bit worried about what's going on in his own day. And Athens, a little bit of historical context is that Athens has been not all that long ago, it's catastrophically defeated in a great war it had with Sparta, but now it's bouncing back. They've kind of got over it, and they've recovered, and they're starting to feel more prosperous, and they're a bit more bullish, and they're almost like they're starting to empire build again. And I think that Plato's worried about this because he can look back at the way they behaved in this war with Sparta, where they did Atlantean things, right? So one of which was a massive seaborne invasion of Sicily, which may have been something that influenced him there that went catastrophically wrong. I think he's also got in mind sort of earlier things in Athens' history where they fended off the Persian invasions of Greece under the Persian kings Darius and Xerxes, who invaded Greece not from the Atlantic but from the east with enormous forces, and were defeated almost single-handedly by the Athenians. And so he's looking at these kind of things and I think worrying about the effects of naked aggression, imperialism and things on his own people. So it's almost like a warning. It's kind of, it's like, guys, stop it. Just stop it. Stop doing this. Don't be like those Persian kings who were a bit Atlantean. They've got all these amazing riches, and the sort of ground plan of Atlantis bears resemblance to cities in Persia, to the royal capitals of Ecbatana and so on, which is a circular construction. It sounds a bit like Babylon with all the canals everywhere. Great engineering projects, which the Greeks regard as ludicrously arrogant, rather than as very cool engineering projects, which they probably were. But so don't be like the Persians. Don't be like your own ancestors overreaching themselves, sending massive armadas to Sicily and it working out badly. And don't be like these Atlanteans who are everything that the ideal state is not. They love luxury. He uses a really good word that's in all of this that really annoys him. What he likes is order and unity and everything in its place, everything the same. He has a word in Greek. It's poikilos. It means, he could translate it as diverse, but it's kind of sort of patterned and jazzy and stuff like that. And everything the Atlanteans have is poikilos. It's over detailed, it's fussy, it's too jazzy, too elaborate. And he really doesn't like this. So don't be like that. Don't wear Hawaiian shirts, guys. You should be wearing a, monochrome hoodie or something. It's that kind of things. What he wants is this sort of sense of controlled order. And if you like, knowing your place, so overreaching beyond what you should be, what is comfortable. If you like, there's enough. Enough is enough. Don't be like the Atlanteans for whom far too much is not enough.
It's interesting. It makes me think of, it feels like there's a sort of parallel with a lot of modern scholars and their interpretation of the book of Revelation within the Christian Bible. Mm-hmm. And this idea that the author was largely writing about the dangers of empire. At that time would have been the Roman Empire, but doing it in a way where they were talking about ancient Babylon, another great empire. Yeah. So as not to, get the wrath, of the Romans at the time, but warning people like, look, empires have one sole purpose, and that's to look out for itself, and they will step on the neck of the poor and the downtrodden. Yeah. So don't fall for that.
Yeah, it's true as that, I think, and it's interesting that that Plato sets has the Atlantis. The Egyptians tell Solon that this all happens 8,000 and 9,000 years ago. So it's kind of located in the Neolithic period, but in a way that's the point. It's a bit like you were saying with the same. If you put it in the distant past, people are more likely to believe it. But there's one of the things that Plato says, that if you set your story in the present, everybody's going to nitpick because they know what the present is like. They'll get distracted with that. But if you set it in the way back in the distant past, but if you like the mythological past, beyond time, then people are more likely perhaps to take on board what you're trying to say. So that's a really interesting parallel, I think.
Yeah, I think the vehicle in the way that it's written is really interesting, because it's sort of the difference between telling someone what to believe versus telling them a story, which sort of sits with the reader, and it forces them to kind of think about it and internalize it.
Yeah, that's true as well. There's a lot of discussion, obviously, in the Atlantis story about, is it a true story? Plato is kind of interesting about the way he presents stories, because he regards them, I think, as a good vehicle for getting information across. And one of the things that he says interesting is he's talking about educating kids, actually, but he says, that there's what we can do is I don't usually like telling lies, but I'm prepared to tell whopping great lies to kids. In order to educate them and make them do what we want to do. So he kind of weighs up this sort of balance between what you might call truth and falsehood. But he, at the same time, he has this sort of concept of the noble lie, where you can tell something that is perhaps factually untrue, but actually within it is buried important truths about as a vehicle of expanding that. So I think there's an element of that as well that is attractive to Plato, just to say, I'm prepared to compromise literal truth in order to impart, if you like, intellectual or moral truth. I think it's just quite an interesting way of handling the whole situation, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I run another podcast and we talk a lot about metaphor.
Yeah.
And the use of metaphor, where people are, well, is it true? Well, maybe it's not historically factually true, but it's certainly true.
Yes. Precisely that, I think, and it is, there's within the Greek words that he uses, true is alethes and false is pseudos, pseudo. And they bat these ideas around really quite a lot, and in other dialogues as well. So Plato is really interested in the relationship between truth and falsehood, and particularly perhaps what kind of truth one can extract from a falsehood in order to make people better, or to be able to make people get your message, if you like.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell people a little bit about where they can get a copy of your book, and ultimately what is the main takeaway that you want people to have from Plato's work, and I don't want people to be too disappointed that they're not going to, maybe they'll cancel their plans to go treasure hunt and find the city.
That's good. I wish them well. I'd be very happy if somebody would find Atlantis, and I'd be more than happy for that. Yes, but please don't send me a whole load of emails with that. There's a lot of people out there looking for it, and I wish them well. For me, I think it's this idea of I'm mesmerized by the island itself, and Plato's descriptions of it are just fantastic. It's if you it's almost like if you're going to live on Atlantis. That's a really cool place. It's much better to live on Atlantis than it is to live in Plato's ideal state, which Plato would not be pleased at my takeaway for that, because he thinks that everything on Atlantis looks, it's all superficial. Everything looks perfect. But once you kind of get underneath the surface of it, it's just this nasty sort of dystopian nightmare of horribleness. To Plato it is. But I think, the idea is this, it's the kind of thing that I think a lot of modern political leaders ought to be reading, really. Guys, stop it. It's, the overreaching of you feel like imperial aggression and aggro against other peoples and other places can only end badly. That's what Plato would like you to take away. So I think so. I travel to all sorts of places that are associated with the Atlantis myth. I've fairly recently been doing some of that, and I enjoy those musings. But in the end, I think it's something that comes back to Plato. So the book that I have written on this is just, or at least in the UK and worldwide edition. The American title has something slightly different, I think. The sort of worldwide one is called A Brief History of Atlantis, Plato's Ideal State, by me, Stephen P. Kershaw. So that's the that's the title of the book. You're very welcome to try and track down a copy of it.
Absolutely. And it's absolutely, I appreciate, again, you coming on and sharing this information with my audience. It's absolutely fascinating to me that someone who wrote so long ago, in ancient Athens, was writing about things that we are largely still dealing with today. And I think that's the most interesting part of the whole story.
Absolutely. As I say, yes, it's an ancient text, but it is incredibly contemporary. And I think that much of Greek writing, be it Plato, be it Homer, whatever it is, and the writers of the tragedies as well. It's it has this lasting relevance, I think, and it kind of makes you think. There's a nice phrase I like to say is that myths are good to think with, and I think Greek literature is very good to think with, and if it makes us think, fantastic. I'm very happy about that.
Absolutely, great having you on. Thank you so much for sharing this information with my audience. I know they're going to love it. We'll put all the relevant links in the show notes. Is there anywhere that you would direct people to stay up on top of what you're up to and what you're working on?
Yeah, I'm just on the point. I'm in about 5 weeks' time. I'm going to become an old age pensioner. I'm retiring, but you can find me out there in the interweb. It's stevekershaw.com is my website, which I never keep up to date enough or whatever, but which tells you about my classical things, a little bit about my travels. You remind me, I now must update this thing, and actually all about my musical things as well. Because when I'm not living in Atlantis, I play jazz double bass, so I do a bit of that as well.
All right. Well, we will send people your way, and happy early retirement. And again, thank you so much.
Absolute pleasure, John. Thank you very much for having me.
That was Dr. Steve Kershaw helping us navigate the murky waters of myth, memory, and lost civilizations. Whether Atlantis was a real city swallowed by the sea, or a cautionary tale carved in stone, its legacy still haunts our collective imagination, a symbol of what we fear losing and what we dream of discovering. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow From the Void, leave us a review, and share it with your fellow seekers of the strange and mysterious. I'm John Williamson, and this has been From the Void, where we search for truth in the shadows of forgotten worlds. Until next time, stay curious.